Hello, everybody. Happy Friday or Saturday to you if that's when you're reading this or listening to this. You've got Kjael here, your loyal MC and my co-host, Kjael. How we doing, my friend?
Doing amazing.
Outstanding. Good to see you. We are back with issue 18. So we're going to be talking, this is going to be an OKR teardown, and we're going to be talking through pricing and monetization. With the headline here is there's a reason most neglect pricing.
The work that goes into it. Listen, it might have been worth neglecting it, but I'm happy we did. We did it.
It is a dark art and an incredible skill, very difficult, but it's something that you definitely want in your tool belt. So let's jump in here. I'm going to pull up the post here for us so we can get after it. All right, cool. So we usually start with a full teardown of the OKR itself. So, or I guess a full description of the OKR itself. So in terms of the objective, the hope here was that new pricing model improves monetization by 15% MRR or greater. And then obviously embedded in that is assumptions around churn, around long-term retention as a function of better plan designs, fitting in with the appropriate profile of your core segments, etc. So this is definitely, or I guess one caveat to pricing is it can't be nearsighted. It's got to be in terms of the long term. So be leery fixating around. I'm having a tough time. Oh, I got you back. Okay. Be leery fixating and kind of on MRR because we're thinking in the mid to long term, and we want to see MRR gains over the long term. We're not necessarily looking for a near term pop. That's very short sighted. But we want a quantitative component to measure the objective. Gucci?
Yeah, I was going to add to that. You got to just plan for scalability. So think with the end in mind and then just reverse engineer how to get to that goal. And that's the dark hole you need to live in for planning on pricing.
Exactly. So what are the key results? We had a lot of key results in here. And this was kind of task oriented. Ideally, best practice is to not have more than 5. We're sitting at about 8. And some are beefy, very beefy. And some, I guess, are kind
necessary.
of preferred. Yeah. So to take it from the top, what we'll be digging into today is the first 2, which are analyze feature usage to determine distributions and value metric to establish core customer segments and inform a working hypothesis for the new pricing plans. From there, you want to execute a competitive audit to inform a view on your new plans in the context of the broader market landscape, obviously. And there's I guess the main goal there is like, hey, obviously you never want to create pricing plans in a vacuum, but you want to be very user-centric. Don't start with a competitive audit. But that said, you need a sanity check when you get to the end of the process to say, hey, what does this look like on a relative basis? Because we're in a competitive market. Some other things that we looked at for key results were to determine user impact. So that's a percentage of users moved to new plan and the dollar change. A break-even point. So this is kind of your base case, which would be, what is MRR going to shake out based on different assumptions around churn, around plan transitions, et cetera. And then that should net out in kind of a, hey, here's a revenue expectation around a base case. We want to identify, obviously, top 3 risks and keep it very simple. And then come up with, you guessed it, a mitigation plan. And then there's a shitload of operations involved in pricing transitions. Holy moly. There's product-related stuff. Hey, if you had features that were gated, guess what? You need to go into the back end and have that kind of consistent with your pricing plan. Stripe. Do our plans exist in Stripe? What about our website? Where is pricing mentioned across all of our digital surface area? We need to make sure that stuff's updated, or you're going to ask them for confusion and support tickets and stuff. So we'll leave it at that. And then, of course, communication. Pricing plans are a PR campaign. And I jokingly in here raised the idea of user relations. It's like put your mouth guard in. It's like, here we go. But you want to tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. Try to proactively, and then we'll get into this, or I guess we can move to it now, and then think about FAQs and try to get ahead of the ball there. So it's like, hey, what are probably the 10 most likely questions we're going to get? Cool, let's draft up an FAQ document. What's involved in folks that are going to be transitioning plans? We need support articles to facilitate that so we can point folks towards content which is more scalable than one-off support tickets, etc. And then, of course, monitor the matrix. You want to set up something to monitor negative sentiment, and ideally, you want to be as responsive as you possibly can. And I guess if we should have added a 9th key result, which is 48-hour crisis response. Just
yes,
you gotta
all hands on deck.
All hands on deck. You got to just be there to react in real time. And then I addressed this later on as well, and you should probably plan on some type of follow-up communication probably 48 hours later to take the feedback, distill it, process it, and then provide some type of communication to address that stuff. So, Gucci, cool to move on?
Gucci gang.
All right. So I wanted to start. I mean, it's so interesting because so much of the conversation around go-to-market is based around what, Kjael, in your take? What's go-to-market?
So go-to-market strategy, in a sense, is, hey, we have a new service or product, and we're just thinking about how do we get people to actually buy into this service. But it's more so, how do we tell a good story where it resonates to them, and then how do we actually create the KPIs that we need to understand? How do we understand the base case or base rates that we need to establish and track, things like that. But go-to-market is just how do we get a product to market in the most efficient method possible. What are we trying to accomplish in terms of revenue? And then how do we tell the best story to have it resonate with people so they actually adopt what we're selling?
Perfect. So I would say, simply put, it's how do we acquire customers?
Yeah.
is usually the entire conversation. And then obviously it gets into retention and customer success. It's very rarely how do we monetize our product? Or it's hey, let's see what the competitors are pricing around. Let's come in competitive and let's go from there. And that really holds back innovation around pricing models. And the thing about SaaS is it's not a widget. It's not a point in time singularly created thing. It lives and breathes. It should get better over time. So value is very dynamic over time. And as a function of that, your monetization strategy needs to be equally dynamic over time. So I simply put, it's our job as operators to really zoom out to the abstract is create value, deliver that value, and then capture it for a business. And obviously, strategy is how do you do so in a profitable way. And then, according to theory, competitive markets compete the profit margin away, and then you're basically forced to compete on costs, and that's what nobody wants to do.
Right.
So one other quick caveat for us here is this is not startup land where there's a ton of hey, we're chasing product market fit. We're going to do these surveys for price sensitivity and willingness to pay. We're going to back into all this stuff, and then we're going to have the most, lick your finger and put it in the air, where's the wind blowing type approach. And then we'll iterate from there. For us, we inherit a huge body of product usage, a huge body of subscription histories, etc. So we have a ton of data to work with. So this is a very different problem to solve or a thing to approach.
Yeah, I was going to add to that by saying in the conversation of how do we provide value, really the place where you want to start is what does value even look like for our customers? And with us, it was a beauty to inherit so much data because we were able to look at those data points and even do the primary research to speak to the existing users to understand where do you find that value? And just tracking after you sign up for a trial and after you convert to paying, what are the outcomes you're looking and how do we get you to that action fastest, right? So it was nice being able to understand what those value points are in the beginning, and now you can build your entire go-to-market strategy against that.
Totally. So now we're going to transition towards some very foundational concepts to kind of establish common ground for the remainder of the session. So I thought this was one of the best visual representations of hey, here are the macro kind of levers available to you. You have packaging, which is how you group features or modules into a pricing plan. You have positioning, which is how those packages are structured such that they address your core segments. And usually this falls into a small, medium, large, silver, gold, platinum, etc. And then of course you have the price points. And within pricing, there is a shitload of complexity, which we're going to move to here in just a moment. But it's good to kind of think, okay, so we've got packages, the various packages that map to our segments is how we're positioning the actual pricing plan, and then we have the dollars and cents. Anything on that before we move on? Okay, excellent. What's it called? I reference it at the bottom. I think it's the pricing roadmap, which was a huge wealth of knowledge for me. But and this is a kind of an intimidating visual here, but on the y-axis you have MRR, and on the x-axis you have customer lifetime. At the very beginning you have implementation or startup fees, like setup fees, however you want to think about that. And then you have at the end exit fees, which would be like offboarding, which are super weird. You don't really see those. The most common thing that you have here are kind of license-based metrics, which should scale based on whatever the parameters around licenses are. You have usage-based metrics, which scale linearly with usage. You have credit-based systems, And all of these things can kind of, or to some degree, are like kind of the core primary elements in terms of the pricing levers that you have available to you. And then you have transactional revenue. This is kind of like pro services, which would be after implementation. So it's like, hey, we're going to get you started. It costs this. On a go-forward basis, you have this many licenses, or and there's this component that's usage-based. And by the way, we can consult after the fact to optimize your instance. That's probably the most conventional pricing structure. And then you have flat add-ons. A lot of times these are like API integrations or things like that. And then you have flat-based fees, which are again kind of fall under the add-on bucket. So a lot of noise there, but this I thought did a really good job kind of encompassing everything. You think it's missing anything, Kjael?
No, I think it covers everything. Honestly, I didn't even think about the credit systems until I took a look at the model earlier, and I was like, credit systems do scale the most. So, what's an example of like a company with a really good credit system today? Would this be like one of those like pay later?
Yeah, well, it depends a lot on the definition of credit systems. Like I interpreted it to be kind of like currency based, which is usually like, hey, you're buying a tranche of something. So it's like you have 1,000 API calls in the premium plan.
Tokenized.
Yeah, so it's like some kind of currency that you prepay that translates to product usage. And then if you go over it, it's $1,000 for 100, or it's whatever for 1,000 API calls. After that, it's a nickel a piece, something like that.
Yeah, and then it just auto charges you based on usage. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason for that is, and there are trade-offs left and right here, because some people, usage-based pricing is great because you pay for what you use, but on the other side, it's not predictable. So controllers and CFOs don't love that. So that's where the thing where it's like, hey, your thing, we estimate you're going to need 1,000 API calls. It costs this. It's a little bit of in the middle where it's usage-based, but it's also defined.
Yeah, and in that scenario, I can see where for the user, it's great because there's not really a lot of guardrails. It's just go, baby, go. And I know you're just going to auto charge me based on my usage. But for the company, it not being predictable, they now have to also continuously figure out, how do we keep driving value every day just to keep this person here? So it's tough. It's definitely tough.
Totally. And we'll get into this too, but like there's such a thin line between charging for what creates value but at the same time not having that tax for the value creation hinder adoption or usage, right? It's like, holy shit, those things are at odds. So it's tough. Yeah. I mean, every single thing is a trade-off. I guess life is trade-offs, but in pricing, it's so acute.
What are you comfortable stomaching, right?
Yeah. Or just be clear on the trade-offs, I guess, is the number one. A problem well defined is half solved. All right, cool. So let's move on. So we were just touching on this. So in the context of the value chain, so this is the most, I think, critical thing to think about, where it's like, all right, let's think about a workflow, a linear kind of diagram of a workflow is useful, but I think to some degree you want to understand what is our user's value chain period in their business, and then what is a workflow or some kind of job to be done or some outcome that our product solves for, and then where in that value chain are we going to introduce the pricing mechanisms. So in this example, moving left to right, we've got inputs on the left and outputs, and this is an AI or ML based business. And on the left side, they have users, starting with users, where you create an AI project in a team. Then you go into gather data and train models. So we're moving from users to now like gigabytes processed. Then you deploy those models, #models, and then the models provide outputs that are predictive or that help you identify patterns, et cetera, and then you can fine tune your operations in that degree. So in this one, you could charge for users, but the fewer users, probably the less models that will be deployed and the fewer outputs that will result that are useful to the business. You can charge on gigabytes processed, which is the training data, but oh shit, you don't want to have people think like, I want to train it on as little data as possible. You want to train it on as much data as possible.
Yeah.
So this one, in the example, I think they landed around, it was models deployed, and then there was some thinking around users. So it was like, hey, you get up to 10 users and then this many models, and then I think maybe users were done on like a bolt-on kind of add-on. But anyway, this is a very, very good example of value chains and thinking about, okay, we're ultimately selling models. We need teams to use our models, and the teams need to feed our models data. So let's probably tax the models because that's where a lot of the value creation occurs, and that kind of balances the adoption usage while capturing the value for the SaaS. Cool?
Perfect.
And here, a very simple OG, incredible. So this is so ruthless, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but the example that he uses is when railroads started happening, like for the common passenger, it was like their life savings to move west in the States, to people who migrated here, and like the risk was death. So they're like, all right, that's what we're competing with. to sell a train across the country, train ride across the country. So in this example, you have there's kind of two core segments here. You have passengers on trains, and then you have people that are moving freight. And so organizing those two into very distinct persona profiles is called fencing. And you can think about fencing in other ways as well, but simply put, you've got passengers and freight. On the packaging side, you've got ticket classes, and this was the original price. And the big thing, and sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier, is you don't price your product, you price your customer. That is the simplicity of that is absolutely beautiful, and and that's called price discrimination, because basically you want to charge the exact right price for that person's profile and the value that they're getting, and you should expect a ton of variance across how much value users are realizing based on their persona, based on their ICP, et cetera. So first class tickets, second class tickets, third class tickets was among the first price discrimination in the economy, which is trippy. Whereas on the freight side, it's basically like you're moving shit. What is it? Do you need us to help you load it? Whereas for passengers, it's like the quality of the experience, dining, etc. So we went through fencing, packaging, then pricing model on the passenger side was typically distance. The further you're going, so straight up usage based. And then the same could be said for freight, but there was a consideration around volume, right? Like how much cubic or like weight do you want us to move? Because that's a consideration as well that influences their cost.
Yeah, and how much distance we gotta like take this weight too, because they still do that today. Like when I was moving across the country, it was literally how many feet do we have to walk between moving your stuff to the truck, and then how much distance does the truck have to move? And it was just a lot. It was just a lot. So that makes total sense.
So this is a good example, and I guess pricing has not been something that causes just SaaS operators to scratch their head. They're operating railroads, and they're like, I'm pretty sure we could charge these people their life savings, or just tell them that we'll get them there alive. And they're like, well,
yeah, exactly. It's like, what is someone willing to pay for this experience? Cool, that's the number we're gonna go with.
That's it. Cool. So now we're going to change gears. We've got some conceptual parameters, common ground established, some definitions of terms, etc. And we're going to move into frameworks that I guess influence or inform exercises. So it's like, cool, we've got a general view of how we go about this and what the levers are that are available in both the macro and the micro. Now let's move on to some exercises to actually get this done. So the first exercise that was extraordinarily helpful is called a product feature matrix. And so if we zoom in here, think about Gartner's 4 quadrants. Damn it, they own that. Where we've got 4 quadrants here on the y-axis, starting from 0, we've got used by one, moving up, used by some, moving up further, used by most, at the top, used by all. On the x-axis, we've got commodity, we've got most vendors do this, further to the right, a few vendors do this, all the way to the right is only we do this. So this is basically trying to consider how often is this thing used and how differentiated or unique is it to us? Because those two things, at the kind of intersection of those two things, should be product value. So in the top right corner of the grid of the quadrants, you've got premium. In the corner to the left, you've got freemium. In the bottom left corner, which is always the naughty corner, you've got noise, which is basically it's used by a few people and everyone offers it. It's like, yeah, just, I don't know, stop doing that. And then only we do this and it's used by a few people, then that's like an add-on, or that's where you start to think about enterprise. So, okay, Kjael, what the hell do we do now? So what we did, and I guess up front, you got to be careful, again, that you don't want the competitive set to influence or bias your thinking too much. But I think the first most important thing is to establish a universe of relevant features. So ChatGPT, go scrape these websites, these pricing pages, and come back and detail the features that are included on the pricing menu. Cool, now you've kind of done that. And you're like, here's kind of what the relevant features are in our direct and kind of adjacent competitive set. Cool. What's interesting is that in our category, so much of the features are commodity based. So for us, we did a little bit of a riff on this where to understand feature value, and we had the benefit or the good luck of having all the product usage data on our side. So we were able to kind of understand usage on a feature level basis from our user base. And then when it came to understanding feature value defined as like differentiated or unique to us, we looked at which features were included in which plans across all of our competitors. So put simply, if this is a premium feature, note it. If it's platinum, note it. If it's silver, note it. If it's gold, note it. And then you can start to understand how these things land. And the simple way to do it is take any given feature and then achieve a view on where it lands in terms of usage. And be careful because pricing influences usage, right? So people are only allowed to use what they pay for. So you got to be very thoughtful that'll skew your results if you're not kind of woke to it. And then what's the value of this as a function of where it's included in our competitive set in their pricing plans. So it's a simple 1 to 4 score for each thing used by 1 to 4. 4 shitload, 1 not very much. Value, 1 not very valuable, 4 very valuable, and then boom. And you don't need to make a sexy scatter plot. You can just figure that out. And then you're like, hey, if you're a 4-4, you're in the top right corner, et cetera, et cetera. 1-1 is noise. That's that. So this, I think, was very useful as a starting point to just kind of start to understand feature value and where these things land. Any questions on that? Anything you'd add there?
No questions, but I was going to say, for everyone that's listening, Kjael puts together these awesome spreadsheet templates for these exercises as we go through them on the back end. I think at some point we'll want to start releasing some of these templates just as takeaways for you guys to play around on your own.
I'm an open book.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so the show must go on. So now it's like, okay, we've got a view on the features that are relevant. We've got a view on their relative value as a function of usage and uniqueness or cost, frankly. Now we can start to think about, okay, how are we going to start to inform our packaging? And again, the most important thing ever is to price your customer and get clear. And what we're looking for here is like, what are the natural cohorts that exist amongst our users? And a simple guiding framework is small, medium, large. You've got smaller groups that kind of use this most stuff. You've got the medium groups, and then you've got the large groups. And so what you want to do is you want to start to go through all your features and establish histograms that show the distribution of usage. So, and then you're looking for clusters, right? So like in the example, and for the more advanced folks, you can use ML to do cluster analysis. I included a link here to that. That's definitely very advanced. I don't think you really need to go through all that. But
useful.
You jump in there, but super. And if you have like a data savage on your team, definitely do it. So as an example, like let's say your software sending invoice fits somewhere, and you're like, all right, I'm looking at invoices, I'm looking at proposals, I'm looking at leads, clients. This would be kind of like a CRM-based business management platform. It's like, all right, let's look at invoices. It's like, oh, interesting. It looks like we have an obvious cluster around, like the majority of folks are sending 1,000 invoices. So let's say 60% of your users are sending 1,000 invoices a year. 20% are sending 250 invoices a year, and then the remaining 20% are sending 3,000. It's like, interesting. Like, okay, those are kind of 3 obvious segments for us. We have, again, kind of like our and then when we go into the actual bell curve, this is what you're looking for. So you're like, we want to put, you've got, and this, like basically, this is a little bit misleading because it's not a bell curve, but you basically, because you're basically determining where people go, but you, the middle of the bell curve, if you're imagining that in your mind, is where the hero plan is. So you want 60 to 80% of your users to follow into the middle plan. The low plan is considered kind of a decoy. That's like a point of entry, and then ideally you're moving users into your hero plan. And then you have the anchor plan, which is to anchor around price. And so like some rules of thumb, you typically want the anchor price to be 4 to 5x the entry point price, etc. But ideally you start to come up, and if we come down here, this is what those plans actually start to look like, right? So this would be the decoy, which is kind of the entry point. This would be plan 2, which is going to address 60% of kind of user needs. And then you have plan 3, which is usually the full Monty, which addresses kind of the remaining 20% cohort. So it should be like you have the fewest number of plan 1 users that generate the least revenue. You have the most amount of plan 2 users that generate a ton of revenue. And then you have a few amount of plan 3 users that also generate a ton of revenue. So that's kind of what the pricing should be distributed as. And then obviously revenue, or there's a cost to support, and there's a lot of stuff that gets baked into the unit economics thinking.
Oh yeah.
But generally, this is what you want. So the histograms, and it should be pretty obvious, right? Where it's like, okay, like, let's say we're just looking at users, right? It's like, it turns out that we're really serving kind of mid-market businesses, and we can measure that by employees or revenue. And it's like, okay, then let's charge based on users. And that's how SaaS has worked since really the beginning. But anyway, that's a simple example there. But hopefully we're starting to pull this stuff together conceptually. So it's like, all right, just to take it from the top. We know the universe of relevant features, cool. We've scored them with this feature matrix, and we understand what like kind of the usage or adoption looks like. And then we've adjusted obviously for the plan selection. And then we also know what the relative feature value is. Cool. Now you start looking on a feature by feature basis to see what usage distribution looks like across your entire users. And you're looking for natural patterns that would inform how you're going to segment your users into probably 2 to 3 cohorts, probably on average 3 cohorts. And then you start to fit those features into the plan designs, where you should land in like the most typical case with a small, medium, large, the t-shirt example, or silver, gold, platinum. And this stuff starts to come together. From here, the kind of final vector is to think about usage-based pricing. So in the example that I shared, maybe around invoices, maybe it's like, hey, we have small, medium, and large businesses using this, and that influences the features that they get access to. But there's, we want to go with usage for invoices because we know that's a little bit better representation, or it fits better in the value chain, however you want to kind of rationalize it. So it could be the case that the small, medium, large, small plan comes with these features, and invoices are usage based, and you get a bucket of 1,000 invoices, and if you go above it, it's a quarter a piece, etc. You start to see how this stuff fits together. Am I pulling that together okay? Any loose ends there, Kev?
Yeah, no, that was actually well said. Summarizing from the top all the way down to the bottom, that was well said.
Okay, beautiful. So now we're going to move on to what is kind of like the final stage of putting this stuff together. And then we'll go into just some concluding thoughts. And most of this is around like communication strategy and mindset, frankly.
All the anxiety that comes with all of this work.
Yeah, it's just, the hard thing about hard things, as Horowitz says. All right, so now we want to lean into the competitive set pretty hard. So again, web scraping's your best friend, at least as a point of departure. It's not going to be perfect. So we looked at what are the core segments? Basically, how many pricing plans are there, and what's the messaging around those plans? It's probably like small, medium, large, or developer plus developer and data teams. However you think about it. So it's basically like how have they defined their core segments and how have they distinguished them? Cool. What's the entry price, right? What's the cost of the decoy plan? Cool. What's the cost variance? So what's the difference between the decoy plan and the most valuable plan, or the delta between each individual plan? So you're kind of looking for the step function in cost from one plan to the next.
And the rule of thumb there is to have it 4 to 5x, the anchor plan 4 to 5x higher than the decoy plan.
Exactly. Yep. And then usage-based features, what are they? Premium features, what are they? And then lastly, and this was you probably want to consider what are the offers and discounts. Like how are they thinking about annual pricing? How are they incentivizing decisioning? Are there any offers? Are there any kind of things to kind of catalyze decision? Because that's obviously how a good prompt works. They kind of need the pain and the motivation, and if you can get a healthy mix of those two, people will take action.
Yep.
So that's what we looked at, and that was super useful as well. So then you kind of make your thing. Be totally singularly focused on your users. Use as much data as you possibly can. Understand and put together, like at this point, a very thoughtful thesis around the plan designs. Then go reality check that against the competitive set and kind of see where you land. I'd probably leave it at that.
I think even in this call, some folks will have to rewind back because it's a lot.
Yeah,
you know what I'm
lot.
saying? Like just going into this, and for anyone that's listening, we did this in a matter of weeks. Not to say like, hey, it was rushed or anything, but when you have the right strategy in place, and with the beauty of AI, it allows you to speed up that process. But traditionally in the industry, we've seen companies take this process from 6 months to a year just to make a final decision. So I would say know your space, know your product, understand how much time it may take you to do this, and take your time through the call. Go back to the points where, hey, I might have missed that. We're not doing that today in my company, and just make sure you're not leaving any stone unturned, and just take your time, because there's going to be a lot of anxiety that goes into just refreshing pricing. I know it's going to be pulling at your heartstrings. Hey, we might lose some users in this, but hey, there are some trade-offs. There are some risks to come. That's why you want to take your time and make sure you are not missing a beat.
Totally. And then obviously you want to bounce this off of as many users as you can, but know that those conversations are super weird where the incentives are just totally at odds. They want less cost and you want more price or more revenue. So you have to kind of come into it. And so that conversation is around, hey, what do you think are the main groups of users that we serve? Like, how would you define, kind of the cohorts? Like, do we have kind of smaller groups, larger groups? Are some more kind of, is it a function of volume? And learn a little bit more. What are the most valuable things to you? Be very careful with what would you pay for this. There's a ton of research around that's like the worst thing to ask. It's like, what would you pay for a Ferrari? It's like $100,000. It's like, but are you going to buy a Ferrari? Probably not. So in terms of some other kind of base case standards or by the book, at least a month's heads up. And it's like, hey, here's what we've done. Here's all the time and energy that we've invested to make this thing better. Here's what we've got planned. Here are all the investments that are coming in, improving the experience across product and support. As a function of that, this is what your usage looks like. This is how the plans are designed as a function of your usage. This is the plan that you'll be transitioning to. Here's how you can make changes to modify the plan that you select. Here's when these plans take effect. And try to just put it out. And I would say a learning lesson for me is describe the changes to the pricing in plain English. We're getting rid of this middle plan because it made no sense. We're opening up access to this other stuff because it was holding people back. This is what influences pricing, and then get into the nitty gritty, because as we're all animals at the end of the day. So people are going to go straight down to the new price, and they're not going to read any of your shit, and they're going to freak out, and then our cohort are going to be like, oh my god, and there's also now to kind of get, I guess, meta. The hardest part is that there will be a vocal minority that whips back. And you cannot let the vocal minority in your mind establish consensus across the majority, because those are separate things, right? And there's tons of theory around this. The only people that are inclined to leave a review are the people that are pissed or thrilled. So that does not represent the vast majority, which are down the middle, which was like, yeah, it was good. It's like, cool, we're going for good, and we'll take thrilleds every day. And we need to resolve the pissed, but you're mostly going to hear the pissed, and don't let that make you think that everybody's pissed. And ultimately, sentiment is one thing, churn is where the rubber meets the road. So, business is about trade-offs. Business is about doing the hard things and doing them well. And then you have to sit back and realize and get stoic with it. And it's like, what is in my control at this stage and what is not in my control? I'm not going to sweat the controllables, and I'm going to practice distinguishing between the two all day, every day. And then you sit back and you see what the data tells you, right? Because I think so many times you go out pressing, it's like, hey, did we do a good job? And it's like, I have no idea, right? Like, I'll tell you in a month.
And I was gonna say, to add to that, that's the part where you leave 48 hours after for the fire drill, all hands on deck. You leave yourself open really to have conversations with those users, whether pissed or really thrilled, that are speaking up. We want to know what people are saying, and this goes beyond just monitoring for negative sentiment. Let's just see what people are saying in general and identify the patterns across that, so we know how to properly engage with them. That's what's really important.
Totally. And then it's like, hey, boom, you get some blowback. Ideally, it's minimized because you've tested everything. Cool. What are the patterns in the blowback? How can you react in a scalable way, which is usually changes to either code or content. So, hey, here's an article about this that we've seen some questions around. And then stay human. I think one of go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the thoughts you had earlier around like allowing the vocal minority to pretty much, let's say, balloon in your head as though this is what the majority of our users think. You can use the analogy of polarizing topics in social media today. People are just here for the attention-grabbing headlines. But when you really actually leave your home and go chat with folks, many people don't actually feel like what you're seeing on the news or in social media. So similar to that, within your own company, you want to think about it like, who is the vocal minority? And is their opinion actually representative of the majority? And if it's not, hey, now you have a clear framework that you can work within.
Totally. And I think the thing is to be responsive as humanly possible. So that things don't escalate. Hey, cool, hear you on this. This is direction, or understood. We're going to act on this feedback, and here's how. You are there. You are there in real time, and you are a human, and you are empathetic. And ideally, what the main thing is that what you're doing is in everyone's interest.
Yes.
Everybody wants a software that's useful to thrive, and they're willing to pay for that. So monetization is a function of like, hey, this is high tides, all ships rise situation. So ideally, that's the main message that you get across. That's like, hey, we're raising prices because we're making the product way better, which is going to make your business more productive, profitable, stable, whatever the case may be. We're in this together. If we screwed up, we're listening and we'll take action. And ultimately, we're here to, make dope software and thrill users. That's the name of the game. That's what we all get off on,
Empathy is the buzzword there. Empathy, empathy, empathy. Be as humanly possible as you can.
Totally. All right, my man. Well, for a Friday and a club banger of a week, woo!
Right. We made it.
Time to hang him up. We made it. Well, pleasure as always, my G, for the love of the game. Most importantly, I think when you're doing this, it's hard and it's lonely and you feel like everything's going to melt away and the business is going to go insolvent and you're going to go bankrupt and God hates you. And it's like, no, dude, just keep your head up, stay in the gym, breathe, journal.
This is the work.
This is the work. And on the other side of it, no matter how it shakes out, you will be a wiser operator. And I think that's what we're all aiming for.
100%. 100%.
All right, my brother. Catch you next week.
For the love of the game.
Peace. Boom. Giddy up.